What's up guys, welcome to another Tutorial Tuesday. Today's episode, I'm going to show you how to do basic HDRs. This is kind of branching off of, or going a little more in depth into what I talked about on the last video, which was how to shoot in midday sun. So HDR is high dynamic range, and that's anytime you're going to want to use HDR or an HDR-like method anytime you have really big contrast in your scene. And that's why I came out here today to this ditch, because I've got the sun over there and it's setting and I'm in the shade, and then we've got all this light back here. So it's a really good dichotomy between dark and light. And this is not something, if you want to try to take one picture in here, if you have that harsh contrast between those shadows and the light and you want one single image to show both, you want as much dynamic range as possible. So to do that, we have to do exposure bracketing. So what that means is we have to take multiple shots and change our exposure to accommodate each part of the dynamic range in the image. So we're going to take one shot to deal with the shadows, one shot to deal with an overall exposure, and one shot to deal with the highlights. And you can do as many of these as you want. Your camera, typical DSLRs can usually do between 5 and 7. Some of them can even do 9 brackets. So if you want to use the bracketing method and not do completely manual, then check out your camera's manual for how you do that. I'm using a Canon camera, so I'll show you how I'm going to do that in my cameras, and it's pretty similar through all of the Canon system. But if you're using something else like a Nikon or Sony, just check out for exposure bracketing and see how to set that up. If you don't want to use exposure bracketing, you just do the other way that I'm going to do, which is just shoot manual and just manually adjust it each time you take it by whatever stop you need to. All right, lady behind the camera made a good point, and that is I'm going to be adjusting my shutter speed. So I'm going to set my aperture and my ISO where I want it, and I'm just going to adjust the shutter speed based on what I need. So from here on out, when I say I'm adjusting it, I'm talking about my shutter speed. Everything else I'm going to leave in manual, and I'm going to leave locked in at what I have. Okay, so I just checked my camera and I've got my 5D4 set up over there, and I've got it set to f11 ISO 100, and I've started it off at 2 stops underexposed, which is 1/125th of a second. So I'm going to start it off at 2 stops underexposed, and I'm going to work my way up a stop at a time until I get 1 to 2 stops overexposed. And that should give me enough images to have the full dynamic range for the shadows, details in the shadows, and details in those highlights up there. So let's go take a shot real quick. All right, there it is. So we just took like 5 images there. All right, so let's get out of here, away from the heat and away from these cursed flies, and go back to the studio. Okay, out of the heat and away from those evil flies, so let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop and get started. Alright, so I'm in Bridge, which is how I like to do my photos, but you can do this in Lightroom as well, so the process is going to be the same. So the first thing you need to do is find all of the images that you want to use for the HDR. Like I said, you could take as many as you want, and you may or may not want to use them all. So I took 5, or I took 6 technically, but I'm definitely not using that one. So this was the start of the first sequence at f11 1/80th of a second. So I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to go down to this one here. That's 4 images. So once all those are selected, just double click on them and it'll open them up in Camera Raw, and then we're just going to select all of them by hitting Shift and clicking, or you can go up here and hit Select All. The next thing that we want to do is we want to go in here and make sure that the chromatic aberration and the lens profile are selected. That's not necessary, of course, but it definitely helps in most cases. So once that's good, I'm going to go back here to Basic, and then I'm not going to do anything else here yet. So I just want those things done to all of those images, and then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to hit merge to HDR. Okay, when that's all done, this is the preview that you're gonna get here. And I shot this on a tripod, but even still, if it was windy or if you moved a little bit at all, it's just good to go ahead and click Align Images. I definitely do not want the computer to do the auto tone. And since I'm dealing with trees and things that were moving a little bit, not necessarily the water, but mostly the trees, I'm gonna go ahead and select deghosting to a medium or high, and then I'm gonna hit merge. Okay, so once it's all done, you'll notice that you have it selected down here, and you can tell by the file name, the HDR DNG. So now is the time you want to go ahead and fix things. This is where we can drop the highlights, and you see now we've got the nice blue back in the sky, and we've got the details back on the rocks here. Now we want to bring those shadows up a little bit more. You can bring them all the way up, but if you want it to look realistic, then you know that this is shady, so it's going to be darker. So I'm just going to bring them up a little bit to around 50 or so. And now my histogram is looking good. I don't have any blacks crushed and I don't have any whites blown out. And that's the purpose of HDR, is to make sure you get as much information in this region without getting spikes here on these ends. So the rest is really up to personal preference. So I'm just going to go ahead and adjust a few things, bring up my saturation. I'm going to bring up the contrast a little bit, but just know that when you do that, you're going to start crushing things, so that you might have to retweak just a little bit. And if you see any extra chromatic aberration anywhere in there, you can come back into here and go to the manual, and you can try to reduce it just a bit more. See, it looks like there might be some here in the water, and I'm just going to bring this up, and now that's all gone. Okay, so now if I hit P, you can see the before and after. So you can see here the whites are just completely blown out and it just looks messy. And then with the HDR, you can tell this definitely looks like an HDR, and that's usually not my style, but I didn't have an opportunity to really go anywhere amazing today, so this was more for demonstration purposes. But we're going to go back into here. So once you're done with that, then you can just open it up, or if you're in Lightroom, then you just stay in Lightroom. And you will notice in here some of the, depending on the deghosting and how windy it was, if you're around a lot of trees and it's real windy, be careful of that, because you will notice movement in those plants. So if you'll notice, I set the deghosting to medium here, and it really looks like I should have done it to high, because we've got a bit of a mess there. So I went back and did it again, and here it is on high, and you can see it's much cleaner. So one more thing I want to mention real quick that I forgot to mention while I was out there is you can do this without a tripod. You notice I had my tripod there, and if you do the bracketing and you put it in burst mode, just put it in burst mode and shoot as fast as you can, and just hold that shutter down, and it will do the same thing as it's doing here. I just did this manually, but it'll do it faster. So, and then make sure you hit that align button when you go back into merging them, and they will usually come out pretty good still. There's a lot of times I do HDR without even without a tripod, because there's a lot of times when you're taking pictures and you don't have a tripod. Alright, so now you know how to shoot and edit some HDR images, and hopefully these techniques will help you be able to push your creative boundaries a little bit, and definitely push past your camera's limitations, because that's what this is all about, is to just really help get what you see in here into your camera and onto the screen. So if you like this stuff and you want to see more, definitely make sure you subscribe to my channel. I've got new videos every Tuesday and Friday. And if you have any questions about anything that I went over or didn't go over concerning HDR, and is there anything else you want to know, make sure you leave those in the comments below and I'll definitely answer them. Make sure you hit that like button, it really helps me out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.